Voxel editing and building take place in the 3D view. Refreshing the renderer will automatically open this render window. First thing to know is that all the buttons you have here around the render window are basically the same that you can find in the Voxel Edit and Voxel Clipboard tabs in your main menu. The only exception is copy to file and paste from file here, which are only accessible in the top bar. The different editing tools are on the left side of the render view. The top side will display the different options these tools have. Undo, redo and copy-paste actions are also here and also have keyboard shortcuts. Ctrl Z for undo, Ctrl Y for redo, Ctrl C for copy, Ctrl V for paste, and Ctrl X to cut. These actions are for editing voxels. Do not mix them up with these actions in the project menu that are used for cutting and pasting your different project items. Quick reminder of the camera movement. Maintain right click to slide horizontally, maintain left click to rotate, and mouse wheel to move forward and backward. If you right-click one time, a quick menu shows up, which is basically the options you have here on the top bar. Voxel editing in Voxel Studio could be summarized in 4 basic actions: fill, carve, paint, and forget. Fill and carve are basically the same thing. You assign to the voxels a shape and a material. Paint is simply assigning the selected material to them. The only difference with carve is that you assign the material 0 to them, which is air, so they are invisible but still have a shape. Forget deletes completely the voxel data, and so it comes back to the original state. That's why I do not recommend to carve large areas you don't want anymore, but instead use the forget action. All of these tools are based on 2 main tools: brushes and boxes. And all of them use the basic actions. Brushes are displayed with their own separate actions. And on the contrary, the box tools have these actions on the top side. Besides the basic actions, you can polish or inflate the geometry. The smooth and grow actions are important in terraforming because they help you sculpt, create curves on the fly, as well as unifying your volumes by filling and carving voxels dynamically. The brushes simply create a cubic shape with custom dimensions. If the snap is on, it will snap on a grid of its own dimensions. If the snap is off, it will snap on the one voxel grid. Left-click to perform the brush action. The mesh brushes fill, carve and paint with an imported mesh. This gives more freedom with the brush shape, especially when you sculpt and paint. The prefab brush fill with a prefab you selected. This benefits from the prefab code, for instance, random scale, position and rotation of a simple rock mesh. Note that your tools are bound to 3 axes. The width is X, red. The depth is Z, blue. And the height is Y, yellow. Refer to the widget and the colors to quickly visualize what is what. This will help a lot for placing meshes and prefabs that have a specific orientation. The box tools create a temporary 3D volume that can take various forms. To draw the box, simply left-click, drag, click once more, drag, and click a third time. You will need at least an horizontal and vertical surface to create the box. If you don't, use the brush tool to add a cubic shape first. You can translate the box in 3 axes, rotate and mirror it manually or using the button here for the 90-degree angles rotation, and mirror actions. The rotation happens around the axis in question. For instance, using the y-axis yellow, rotates your shape horizontally. If the snap is on when you draw the box, each face will snap on the one voxel grid. If the snap is on, each translation will be incremented by one voxel. If you want to create angles that matches the grid, simply move the points you need. You can switch between snap on and off at any moment. Manual rotation don't use the snapping and remains off grid. You can swap between point and face mode anytime by simply click on their icons. The box is a simple cubic volume with 8 points, but you can deform it and subdivide it. Points mode button has a drop-down menu. If you click the arrow, you can choose how many subdivisions you want for each axis. If you change the number of points, you need to draw a new box or paste your voxels one more time. If you click Escape, you lose your selection. Simply click Restore Selection to have it back. Left-click to select a point or a face. Maintain Ctrl to select multiples. Maintain Shift to select backward points or faces. You can also Ctrl-click and drag to select the points you need. Click outside your box to deselect R. You can subdivide the volume on the 3 axes if you add more points on an axis and tweak the geometry. The volume will adapt and a smooth curve will be created. This is very handy to create all kinds of curves and smooth shapes. If you just want to create hard edges, don't use any subdivisions and simply drag the points or face manually to modelize the shape. Using these two methods, you can mix and match hard-edged and rounded volumes. When it comes to the snap on the grid, the best is to practice and you will know when and where to use it, so it's completely up to you. When you are using subdivisions, I recommend to use the snap, so you can place a new box easily and continue your shape. The grid provides a guideline for building. For instance, in architecture, your floors and staircases commonly need to have consistency with each other. You can also use the box to organize, measure, and compare your building elements. A last word on the box rotation. Be aware that the rotation is based on the center of your box. If you make a 4x5 box on grid and decide to rotate the box by 90 degrees, the volume will not be on grid anymore, the edges would be in the middles. You can always use the snap off and replace it manually. And click snap on again. Or you can make your selection box one voxel larger on one side, so the box dimensions will have even or odd numbers on each side, but not a mix of both. Another way is to simply move the points manually on the grid. With the selection box tool over here, you can fill the space with the material selected, modify, copy, or delete voxels inside the shape. The two other box tools below are filling the volume with the mesh you imported as FBX, or a prefab from your prefab library. If you transform the box, whatever it contains will deform as well. If a mesh has its material imported, the material slot becomes irrelevant. It will be voxelized using its own skin and solid materials. If your mesh doesn't have this, it will simply be voxelized with the material selected. For the prefab box, you can assign different materials for every mesh used by the prefab. And replace the meshes by actual FBX you imported earlier in your project. Please refer to the prefab videos and the online documentation for more information. If you want to copy voxels, use the box tools. They will copy the voxels in the shape of whatever they contain. Full volume, mesh or prefab. Once copied, the voxels are ready to be moved and pasted. If the snap is on and only translations, proper 90-degree rotations and mirror actions are made, your voxels will be pasted perfectly with the exact same geometry. Also, be sure to select one voxel more than your actual shape in order to have a perfect copy. The box tends to copy but also constrain the voxels to its own shape, which may or may not be the thing you want to do. A little tip for selecting rapidly a shape floating in the air: maintain Shift and left click with the basic selection box. This will create an instant box around your shape and add a little extra volume on the sides so you can copy it without any problems. A little note on the air voxels. They can be essential and part of the building process. Let's assume you want to create a window. Carve the space to create air voxels. Create your window in here. And copy the whole thing. The air can be pasted as well into the wall now, because it has an actual shape. If you don't create air first, or forget to uncheck the Paste Air button, Pasting the window will not create a hole into this wall. You can save a group of voxels on your hard drive. To do that, simply draw a box and click Copy to File on the Voxel clipboard menu in the upper banner. It will create a specific file that can be reused later or for another project. When you paste from File, you paste voxels previously created and saved, and you'll need to reassign materials to them. You may have used meshes, so you'll have to know what materials were used. The pointer here is just a tool that does nothing except showing a green brush on your mouse pointer. It's based on your brush size. Using this tool prevents mistakes when you move across your scene. The material picker here allows you to select the material directly from the 3D view. It can be very useful for switching materials rapidly. The line tool is basically adding voxels between two surfaces. I recommend to use the box tools instead for more precision. Final one is the tweak tool. This allows you to modify the surface and the voxel shape with high manual precision. Let's take an example. I used the box to make a brick. With snap off, I push the edges of the box and don't hesitate to click multiple times to force the voxels to take this particular shape. To recreate the box shape, the voxels will be added and spread uniformly. They don't go too far from their position. Half a grid unit. Past this 0.5 value, another voxel is created. The tweak tool allows you to move the voxels by 1.5 units, so a single point can go on top of other voxels. It can hide them completely or go through them. That way you can microsculpt the geometry, create interesting gaps and overlapping, and correct some artifacts that can happen when you build. In addition to that, the UV button allows you to tweak the UV coordinates of one particular point. This can be used for correcting some of the UV deformations that can happen when voxelizing meshes with UV materials. To conclude the voxel editing part, there is something very important to talk about. Once you start modifying, adding or removing voxels into the world, they become voxel edits. If I try to copy the terrain, it just doesn't work because the terrain is on another voxel layer. I do not recommend to build intricate things directly on the terrain, because the engine does some kind of transition between the voxel edits and the terrain, and sometimes it can be difficult to know what is what. You want to do your work on top of other voxel blocks or up in the air, and copy-paste the final result in the terrain when your construction is finished. Of course, it's possible to blend them together softly by doing some sculpting and painting. If you really want to turn a piece of terrain into voxel edits, I simply recommend to select the area and use the smooth action once, and it will become fully editable.